It's 9 o'clock on television, on radio and online in the United Kingdom and across the world. This is Mark Dolan Tonight. In my big opinion, Labour have had the worst start in government in living memory. I'll be reflecting on a catastrophic first 100 days in power. Just imagine what the next 1,000 days hold in store. In the big story, Sir Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff, Sue Gray, sensationally steps down. Is this new government unravelling before our very eyes? I'll get the views of the BBC's former chief political correspondent, John Sargent. Meanwhile tonight, a shock development in the race for the Conservative Party leadership as James cleverly overtakes Robert Jenrick in a survey of party members. I'll be joined by legendary Brexiteer Tory MP Mark Francois for reaction. And in my Take at 10 in an hour's time, speculation is growing about Gary Lineker's future on Match of the Day as the BBC enters crisis talks with the star. So, should he stay or should he go? I'll be giving my fearless verdict about Gary Lineker and the BBC at 10 o'clock. You won't want to miss it. And tonight's top pundits, Suzanne Evans, of course, a top political consultant and broadcaster, TV news legend Mike Crick, and Tory party grandee, former Conservative MP Sir Michael Fabricant. Sue Gray quits. 100 days of Labour, my verdict. I'm not pulling my punches. All of that after the news headlines and Lewis Mackenzie.
Good evening, it's 9 o'clock. I'm Lewis Mackenzie here in the GB newsroom. Sir Keir Starmer's facing fresh turmoil as his Chief of Staff, Sue Gray, resigns. Her exit follows reports of tensions in Number 10, including with the Prime Minister's chief advisor, Morgan McSweeney, who's now stepping into her role. Conservative leadership contender Robert Jenrick says her departure exposes vicious Labour infighting and claims the government is in freefall. In response, Downing Street has announced 5 new senior appointments, with Sir Keir Starmer insisting the changes will strengthen his team as he approaches 100 days in office. The Prime Minister has raised concerns. The Prime Minister has raised concerns that sparks of war in the Middle East are igniting tensions at home, with a sharp rise in hate crimes against Jews and Muslims. Writing in the Sunday Times, he also raised fears of a direct conflict between Iran and Israel, which he says could have catastrophic global consequences. The PM's warning comes as Israel expands its airstrikes in Lebanon. Massive consecutive strikes have hit Beirut's southern suburbs, with Israel claiming its forces have killed 440 Hezbollah fighters in its ground operations in the south of the country. A record-breaking 973 migrants crossed the English Channel in a single day, according to the official figures. They arrived in 17 small boats, surpassing the previous record of 882 set in June of last year. Yesterday's surge also came as 4 migrants, including a young child, sadly died making the journey. The total number of arrivals this year has now reached 26,000. Russia has launched more than 80 drones and 3 missiles at Ukraine in a significant overnight attack. It comes as President Zelensky prepares to unveil a victory plan during a crucial allies meeting in Germany on the 12th of October. This plan is expected to detail steps towards ending the war with Russia. While specifics remain under wraps, US officials suggest it includes a revised request for increased military support and long-range missile systems. And as Ukraine nears 1,000 days of conflict with Russia, Boris Johnson says the Russian president is bad but not mad. In a candid interview with GB News' Camilla Tominey, the former Prime Minister shed some light on his interactions with Vladimir Putin, providing a glimpse into their complex relationship.
He means no good for this country. He regards the United Kingdom as among their most important strategic foes, probably their most important strategic foes, which is a pity, but he's chosen that path. And we're now in a very, very unhappy position. And you know, what he is doing in Ukraine is criminal, and it is also a mistake. It's a mistake for Russia, it's a mistake for Putin.
And finally, a new blood test that could detect 12 common cancers is getting a major boost, thanks to a £148 million investment in cutting-edge medical technologies. The Health Secretary says the funding will also help advance AI diagnosis and personalised treatments, with research hubs being set up across UK universities. Wes Streeting, himself a cancer survivor, says the investment could save lives while strengthening Britain's role as a leader in life sciences. Well, those are your latest GB News headlines. I'm Lewis Mackenzie. More from me in an hour's time.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
The race for the Tory leadership gets exciting. Sue Gray resigns. And in my take at 10, Gary Lineker and match of the day. Should he stay or should he go? My verdict. But we start with my big opinion. Good evening. I agree with Labour supporters. The freebie scandal is a distraction. A distraction from the terrible policies of this new government. Yes, the Prime Minister's abject greed and double standards in taking over £100,000 worth of freebies since 2019 is an important story. And yes, today's breaking news, the departure of the PM's Chief of Staff, Sue Gray, paints a picture of a government falling apart at the seams, with the appointment of Gray in the first place having been a total political scandal, given her previous role as a supposedly neutral civil servant and laughably tasked with investigating Partygate. So much for a fair trial. But the so-called optics of these scandals pale into insignificance compared to the terrible things that this government has actually done as they approach their first 100 days in power. Where do you start? Handing over sovereignty to the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, gifting a strategic opportunity to China. Refusing to commit to the long-term future of Gibraltar and the Falkland Islands, the latter of which over 250 UK servicemen gave their lives in 1982 to preserve. There is Angela Rayner's brainchild of the overhauling of workers' rights. Time-consuming red tape, the scrapping of 0 hours contracts, the flexibility of which over 1 million people enjoyed last year, and a disincentive on business to hire casual labour. Companies covering sick pay from day one, which will make struggling small businesses sick. Making it harder to fire people who are useless at their job, potentially from day one of their employment, whilst also shortening the probation period, taking away power from companies to decide which members of staff are delivering and which are not. There is the madness of Ed Miliband scrapping new oil and gas licences in the North Sea, rendering us reliant on flaky renewables and importing fossil fuels from abroad for the foreseeable future. There is the assault on the UK car industry by needlessly bringing forward a ban on the sale of new petrol and diesel cars from 2035 to 2030, the only winners of which will be Volkswagen, Mercedes, Fiat and Skoda. Why? Because the EU will continue to make and sell these cars for another 5 years, long after British factories have stopped production. Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson has scrapped the free speech legislation aimed at universities, which means that higher education will continue to churn out a generation of intolerant, closed-minded and brainwashed robots. Now, to be fair to the government, they have achieved one record since coming into office. 1,000 migrants entered the country illegally yesterday. That is the highest in a single day this year. 4 people tragically died, including a child who it's reported was trampled to death. The illegal crossings are an economic, national security and humanitarian disaster. Labour's stroke of genius was to axe the Rwanda plan, our only serious deterrent, which the Irish government admitted was already working before the first flight had gone. Feared tax rises in the October budget to pay for inflation-busting pay packets for junior doctors and train drivers are already seeing Britain's wealth creators taking flight, with 10,000 millionaires expected to leave the UK this year alone, another unwanted record. Plus, there are concerns that the non-DOMS tax, an egregious assault on wealth creators from abroad, ludicrously started by the Tories, may now cost the country money. Rachel Reeves may cook the books, tweaking how debt is calculated, guaranteeing a financial burden on future generations and the risk of more inflation. Teenage boys at school could be reported to a terror watch list called Prevent for being sexist in the classroom. True story. And this spiteful administration has decided to price lower-income families out of private sector education. Even the Observer newspaper, which is the in-house newsletter of the Labour Party, today reveals that the government's tax raid on private schools may have to be delayed because of warnings from unions, tax experts and school leaders about admin chaos, teacher job losses and further pressure on the state sector. Well, that's hardly surprising, is it, given that a reported 10,000 children have already left the private sector since this wicked policy was announced. It's unconscionable to tax any institution which educates our kids. So if this is what Labour can achieve in 100 days, just think what they can achieve in 1,000. The freebie scandal looks trivial compared to what they're actually doing in government. Based on how they've started, there is no way that Labour will win the next election. But the question is, how much of a country will there be left to rebuild once they're gone? Labour, their first 100 days. Your verdict, please. gbnews.com/your say. But first, tonight's top pundits, political consultant and commentator Suzanne Evans. Also delighted to welcome TV news legend, the one and only Michael Crick, and former Conservative MP Sir Michael Fabricant. Good to see all three of you. Suzanne, let me start with you. Labour, after 100 days, your verdict?
It's been pretty dire, hasn't it? I can't remember in my lifetime a government that was so unpopular so quickly. Arguably Liz Truss's government, although I thought she was fantastic, actually. That budget was great. But you would disagree, I know, Michael. I thought it was amazing. I had tears in my eyes. Finally, a Conservative budget. But anyway,
just think if she'd stayed leader with the Conservatives, would have ended up with even fewer seats.
Putting that aside, they've not had any honeymoon period at all. And actually, it's not even 100 days yet. It's not technically 100 days until a week today.
Next Saturday.
It's, next Saturday, Sunday, one or the other. So it's only 93 days. It's been an absolute... And you did a very good list there of all the terrible things that they have done wrong. And I've been racking my brains since I got here tonight thinking, is there anything I agree with that they've actually done? And there is one thing, and that's Rachel Reeves, Chancellor, talking about cutting the foreign aid budget. But, of course, David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, is pushing back against that. So they've done nothing wrong. It's astonishing when you see the front page in The Guardian attacking them, when you hear broadcasters on other channels, who I tend to think are a little bit more left-wing, attacking them, when you hear Labour supporters attacking them. There's a left-winger I actually retweeted today because I agreed with him, and I was shocked because I thought normally we're definitely not on the same page, but today we were, and that was over the assisted dying bill that's potentially going through. So, yeah, no honeymoon period whatsoever, complete disaster. They've alienated everybody, and partly because what they've done is their policies have not been thought through. They've been the politics of envy. It's a policy that's policies to please their hardline socialist supporters. Very few of those Labour people who voted, though, are actually that hardline, and I think they're devastated and shocked.
Michael, it's my view that the freebie scandal is important. We should talk about it, but it is a distraction. What's really concerning me is what this government is actually doing.
Well, it has done some good things. Don't suppose any of you will think they're good. I mean, scrapping the Rwanda scheme. Rwanda is an authoritarian, illiberal country, and it's not the sort of place that you should send people.
Denmark was going to
nothing in its place.
Well, Denmark is wrong. But let me make some more general points, otherwise we start arguing about individual things.
Sure.
This government lacks, and this Downing Street lacks political judgment. you know, Starmer is new to politics, actually. He's only been an MP 10 years, and 9 years. And he didn't do any politics before. He hasn't got political instincts. That's why he makes silly errors. But Sue Gray, thankfully now gone, should have been advising him. She was, after all, propriety advisor in the Cabinet Office and ethics advisor. And she should have said to him, look, it looks really dreadful to take £16,000 worth of suits.
This is a woman that's just fresh from investigating Partygate.
Exactly. And so many of the other things. I mean, that they've just got their... what they now need is people in Downing Street who understand how policies are going to go down with the general public. The other thing they've done wrong is that they put all their effort into winning the election. It's now clear that in most areas of activity, they put no effort into working out how they were going to do all the things they promised.
Their manifesto was a fabrication. You know, I remember Rachel Reeves standing up there saying, our manifesto is going to be fully costed. And I thought, no, it won't be, because they never are. There's only been one. That's the one I wrote for UKIP in 2015. That's the only one that's ever been fully
honest manifesto.
Only honest manifesto ever.
However, none of this is as bad as the absolute shower that was the last Tory administration, Sir Michael.
Well, you have to say that, don't you, for Ofcom? I don't think...
Well, I'll say it as well.
Well, I don't... Well, yes, you should ask him to
Well, the public took that view. They chucked you all lot out,
Well, we'd been in office for some 14 years, and I think, you know, we were tired, quite frankly. But, you know, it's easy to say, of course, Labour has been a complete shambles, but it's not just the three of us saying it. I've got some amazing... The latest stats is that the net approval rating for this government now is minus 39% just 3 months in, which compares with plus 68% when it was Tony Blair. And 57% of Labour supporters apparently now disapprove of policy which the government is doing. And, you know, all these things which were seen to be obvious things to do, politics of envy, like you said, politics of envy, like doing the non-dom, like doing the taxing of private
non-dom tried to do the
non-doms was introduced by Jeremy Hunt.
It was introduced by Jeremy Hunt, but it's been
a very stupid policy.
Not to
I
the same
agree with
extent.
you, because it's actually costing the state money.
Well, let me tell you, we're going to come back to this. Temperatures are rising. My pundits have strong views. We will return to this story. But next up, in the big story, Sir Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff, Sue Gray, has stepped down. Is this new government unravelling before our very eyes? I'll get the views of the BBC's former chief political correspondent, John Sargent, next.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Right, we're having beans this morning.
Beans for breakfast. There's no better breakfast, is there?
I like beans on toast for breakfast.
So do I. I would actually call myself a baked beans connoisseur.
Would you? Well, we can put you to the test. Tell us what the story is.
The story is, you might think beans, you might think Heinz. Heinz means beans.
Beans means Heinz.
Beans means Heinz. Heinz means beans. Who knows? So, of all of the supermarket baked beans, it is actually the Aldi supermarket version, this version over here, which came out on top. The Bramwell's baked beans, 76% on the taste test.
And they're much cheaper as well.
Much cheaper. Households can save, if you're buying 2 cans a week, £100 a year buying the Aldi version of these baked beans. So we thought we're going to do a blind taste test this morning to see...
So we've got the Aldi beans, we've got M&S beans, and we've got beans Heinz. So I think number 2 is the best one.
Yeah, I agree.
Right,
2 came first best to me.
So the Heinz is number 3.
Interesting.
Which was the worst one?
Which is the worst one, which is the ones... Actually, I'll buy it home.
Do you know what? That's just proven it. M&S was number 1. And Aldi was number 2, which was our favourite as well.
I said M&S.
Yeah, and we both said Aldi.
Right,
We did say Aldi. I have to be honest, I was not expecting that.
I told you. This is the hill I will die on.
that
These
one.
are the beans that I get at home and I love them.
They are
At
actually.
university, you get the tin that's half that size, and it was 21p for the store ones and 23p for Heinz baked beans. And as I say, the key was in the thickness of the sauce and how hard the beans were.
They actually are really nice.
Stunning.
I am really surprised, and we buy more than 2 cans a week, so it saved me a couple of £100.
We get through 2 cans.
you like the
in
Aldi
the
ones?
city.
I like the Aldi ones. I'm shocked.
They're a lot
There you go.
cheaper. Yeah.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Well, a big reaction to my big opinion, my verdict on Labour after almost 100 days in power. It's not going very well. That's the plot spoiler. This on the message board from Paul. I suppose come 2029, we'll have another split between the Tories and Reform, and it will let Labour in for another 5 years. Paul, thank you for that. Keep those messages coming. But first, it's time for this. Yes, it's time for the big story, and today, just 3 months into his premiership, Sir Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff, Sue Gray, has stepped down, saying that she risked becoming a distraction. She'd been caught up in a row over her own pay packet, famously out-earning the Prime Minister, as well as ongoing allegations of sleaze and reports of tension within the No. 10 operation in regards to the scope and power of her role. Well, let's get reaction from the former chief political correspondent of the BBC, John Sargent. John, brilliant to have you on the programme. Can I ask you, first of all, your reaction to this resignation? We saw it coming, but damaging nonetheless.
Yes, we certainly saw it coming. What happens when there's a real long-running row like there has been over the clothes and the spectacles that the Prime Minister wears? I mean, how absurd. That goes on day after day after day. So something had to give. And traditionally what happens is that you make sure there's a minister who can be blamed, and then there's a long review of the processes. On this occasion, couldn't find a minister, but they certainly could find someone to blame, and that is Sue Gray. She's right at the centre. She's the Chief of Staff. She was the one who should have stopped this argument going on for so long. She should have had more political advice and better political advice throughout. She's a civil servant. It doesn't mix. She was close to the Prime Minister, and you really need a political leadership. Without a political leadership, you get this shambles. Sometimes when the Conservatives come to power, they think, what we need is a businessman. We need someone who knows the difference between good and this, that, and the other, can work it all out. Now, on this side, I think what we need is someone who knows about government, someone who really knows how No. 10 works. Sue Gray. Answer is complete shambles. You need a political leadership, and as Bill Clinton found out, when the campaign ends, you've got to institute the idea of the permanent campaign. Make sure at all points that your Prime Minister and your political leadership keeps the ratings up, and make sure the public think, they really are doing a good job. They completely failed in the past few months.
Are these just teething problems for this new government, John? Can Sir Keir Starmer turn it around, particularly given that he's replaced Sue Gray with Morgan McSweeney, who masterminded Labour's election campaign? Are sunny uplands ahead?
Well, you don't know. I mean, he's certainly a brilliant campaign strategist, Morgan McSweeney. People who know him say he'll always keep a grip, incredibly hardworking, knows exactly how to handle things politically. And so much of what they've done are political problems. I mean, for goodness sake, why have they been going on and on about a black hole in the accounts of 22 billion when the public think the whole public sector is a shambles? You can't get to the GP, you need more money spent on defence, transport, the NHS, all these things. Why not stick to that and say our budget will be about trying to get things better, trying to get the country back to normal, instead of these crazy discussions about a black hole. And people don't know what a black hole is, and they certainly aren't going to be either in favour of or against it. But if you say our job is now to try and improve public services. We've got to get waiting lists down. People mustn't have to wait for all this time. People have got to get some feeling that this country is in charge. They haven't had that. All they've had is a feeling that it's all so difficult, it's all going to be a problem, and tax is going to rise. It makes it much harder for the government to get their budget through. It makes their whole job more difficult. And that's where I think Morgan McSweeney will come in, as he did in the election campaign, and make sure that at every point they don't drop these stupid mistakes. You can get around most of these problems, but you can't if people don't understand the difference between a lawyer's argument, well, we did nothing illegal, we'll just declare what we've been given in donations. Will that be all right? No, it won't be all right, because it gives the impression that you don't know the difference between right and wrong. It gives the impression that you're rather pleased with how sleazy you've been.
John, in all of your decades reporting on British politics, have you ever known an administration to get off to such a bad start?
No, this is certainly the worst that I can remember. I mean, they had the problem was they were changing the leader of the civil service, so they had to appoint that. The prime ministers had no parliamentary private secretary. They've had this whirlwind of problems that they've had to cope with, and it just gives the impression they're not in charge. Now, it always takes time. Normally, at a period like this, during the summer vacation, you think, OK, well, that'd be all right. No one knew the election was coming. Sue Gray's job was to prepare everybody where you'd be sitting, what you would do. But it gives the impression they sweep into Downing Street, and the key question always in any bureaucracy is, where are you going to sit? And the key question in government is, and how close is your office to that of the Prime Minister? And if the answer is, oh, we don't know, we'll sort that out. No. Because the person who's next door to the Prime Minister, right alongside his office, they're in charge, and they're the gatekeeper. They work out who gets in to see the Prime Minister, who gets in to talk to the Prime Minister, who the Prime Minister agrees to allow into the office. So these things, they may seem trivial. You think, oh, surely you can work this out. But no, it's a power battle which has now been won, I think quite correctly, by the political people. And they won't make these mistakes. They know they've now got to prepare the ground for the budget. And it mustn't be a damp squib. Yeah. Everyone must know what kind of things they're after. And for goodness sake, don't say black hole. Yeah. Just say the difficulties in all these publics. Everyone will understand this.
Yeah.
You say, do you want to go and see your GP? Are you worried about this? What about defence? What about transport? What about all these things that people care about? What about immigration? All these things there. You've got to make sure that what you do seems to fit this pattern.
Indeed. Well, John, I tell you what, they could do with you in number 10 advising them. Stay with us, if you will, because let's bring Suzanne Evans into this conversation, political broadcaster. Suzanne, Sleazegate, the winter fuel allowance, Sue Gray's departure. Do the public have long memories, or can the PM bounce back from this?
I think, on the one hand, we could be teething problems, but I actually think that's more than that. I think the public's got very long memories, particularly on the winter fuel allowance. Even if they were to back down on that now, which I don't think they're going to, I think people will remember that for the next 5 years, and I think it will be a vote loser come the ballot box. Really interesting hearing John's assessment of the situation. I too think that Sue Gray was something of a scapegoat. She shouldn't have been appointed in the first place, in my view. To have somebody that was involved in investigating Boris Johnson over the Partygate issue, basically ruling against him, to then come in as a political appointment into Keir Starmer's government was a very, very bad look. Also, that she then ended up being paid more than the Prime Minister when she was offered the opportunity. And had she been a little bit more savvy and a little bit more political, she should have thought, yeah, that's a really bad story. I don't want to be seen to be being paid by the Prime Minister and taking a pay cut. I think it was only a few £100 less. But she didn't. So John's absolutely right. She's a civil servant, not a political animal, but obviously had political aspirations. But I think John's also placing a lot of trust here, as if that's the right word, in Morgan McSweeney, Labour's election guru. But let's not forget, I don't think Labour won the election. I think the Conservatives lost it. So if one man is being credited for the huge success that Labour had at the ballot box, I think that's actually wrong. And I think that's another reason why Labour have gone wrong so early on in their government campaign. They were swept in on a wave of popularity, they thought. I don't think that's right. It wasn't that they were popular, it's that the previous government was unpopular.
John, briefly, if you can, it's been a turbulent 3 months for the Prime Minister. How tainted is his reputation, do you think?
No, it has. Suzanne's quite right. It has been badly tainted. I'll tell you what worries me about him. Is he too much of a lawyer? And lawyers have a way of saying, well, you know, I think we'll be able to argue that case. I think we can defend ourselves. That's not the point. The point is, how will this go down? And Suzanne's quite right about this. It is going to be a terrible stain. It will take them a long time to get over the idea that, hold on a moment, just slip him a new pair of glasses or an incredibly expensive suit and we're in there. Well, that is absurd. You can't run things like that. Have they got time? Yes, they've got a big majority. Had he been a Conservative at the end of the Conservative government, of course, by now he'd have been out already, wouldn't he? So, I mean, from that point of view, he's a Labour Prime Minister. They've got to have him. The other main point, of course, is that Labour are now far less dependent on the unions than they used to be. So they have to be used to the idea, very difficult, of getting donations of some kind, and how do you mix that up with ordinary money? And that will take a great deal of unravelling. One thinks, I'm afraid, endlessly of that thing. You know, oh, what a tangled web we
John,
when
absolutely.
we practice to deceive. I mean, this is going to be difficult. It will take time. Have a review, I would say. You've got the person who's going to be blamed, Sue Gray. Now have a long review into the whole question of donations and what happens to them.
Absolutely fascinating stuff. John, thank you so much for joining us. The former chief political correspondent of the BBC, the former political editor of ITN, John Sargent. Thank you, John. And Suzanne is back after 10, reacting to my take at 10. But next up, on the eve of the appalling October the 7th attacks in Israel, has the BBC's reporting of the war in Gaza brought shame on this country? We'll debate that next.
Good evening and welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. As we go ahead into Monday, the rain should be clearing, then sunshine and showers for many of us before turning colder later into the week. So the unsettled conditions are all to do with this area of low pressure out towards the west and these fronts driving cloud and rain. So there could be some early evening sunshine towards the southwest, but otherwise cloud and rain continuing to move its way north and eastwards, affecting much of Scotland to start Monday morning. Clearer skies behind that, turning drier. We'll still see a few showers around, but temperatures generally staying up at around 10 or 11 degrees. So it is going to be a damp and gloomy start across Scotland. We've got outbreaks of rain persisting. This will gradually move its way northward. We've also got a strong easterly wind as well, giving a chilly feel to start the day. Cloudy conditions remaining across Northern Ireland with some showery outbreaks of rain here and pushing into northwestern parts of England. Further towards the south, hopefully waking up to some brighter skies, but also there are going to be some showers around. So that band of rain across Scotland will gradually move its way northwards, affecting much of Orkney and Shetland. Otherwise, it's a case of sunny spells, scattered showers. Some of these could be heavy, containing the odd rumble of thunder, perhaps emerging to give some longer spells of rain at times too. But where you do dodge the showers, we'll see temperatures rising up to 17, possibly 18 degrees towards the south, but unpleasant towards the north. Further spells of heavy rain moving their way northwards across Northern Ireland and into Scotland, and then towards the south through Tuesday, another cluster of showers. Again, could be on the heavy side. Some places may dodge these to see some sunny spells, and that continuing through Wednesday too. But as we go later on in the week, it is going to be turning colder from the north. Bye-bye.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date. Or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive?
Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now, on the eve of the appalling October the 7th attacks in Israel, with claims of 1,500 examples of anti-Israel bias made against the corporation in the last 12 months, has the BBC's reporting of the war in Gaza brought shame on this country? Let's get the views of entrepreneur, political commentator and former MEP Lance Foreman. Lance, good to see you in the studio.
Likewise.
What's your appraisal of the BBC's coverage of this story?
I think the BBC have been completely shameful, actually. Right from October the 7th last year, they failed to report the story in a balanced way. They refused to call Hamas terrorists. I mean, it's just outrageous.
And it's a designated terror organisation as per the UN, the British government and the EU.
Absolutely. There was a recent report done by a lawyer, Trevor Assison, and he looked at BBC reporting both from a legal perspective and also used AI, where they analysed, I think, over 9 million words since October the 7th. And they found that the reporting by the BBC, and particularly BBC Arabic, was just about as bad as it gets. And the problem is the BBC management just do nothing about this. This is not new, Mark. You know, the BBC were accused of being biased against Israel over 20 years ago. They commissioned a report by one of their journalists, Malcolm Dolan. This report was done, as I say, 20 years ago. It's never seen the light of day. The BBC spent £500,000 of legal fees to make sure that this report never sees the light of day. It's absolutely appalling.
Don't the BBC have an impossible job to do, though? This is a conflict, this is a war, there are two sides. There will be people watching the BBC's coverage who are pro-Palestine who aren't happy with what they're seeing.
No, the BBC have a duty to be unbiased. And, you know, if you look at their reporting, it is completely biased on the side of the Palestinians. You know, whenever genocide is referred to, 9 times out of 10, they're accusing Israel rather than the genocidal group that is trying to actually get rid of Israel. BBC reporting is appalling, as I say, and particularly BBC Arabic. Many of the BBC reporters were actually, you know, they've been on social media cheering what happened on October the 7th.
Now, the BBC belongs to British Jews as well. They also pay the licence fee. So you're a Jewish man. What has the impact been within the Jewish community of the reputation of the BBC, would you say?
Well, it's absolutely shocking. You know, we all know that the BBC just constantly pumps out and churns out this stuff. And the problem is that, you know, the BBC for decades has been seen, I mean, not now that GB News exists, but it's been seen as the, you know, the gold standard of journalism internationally. And the problem is that when the BBC churns this stuff out, it gives the green card for other broadcasters around the world to say, well, look, the BBC are saying this, why can't we do the same? And, you know, you look at other channels, Al Jazeera, constantly pumping out sort of anti-Jewish conspiracy theories. Al Jazeera was formed by staff that came out of BBC. It is a real problem. And, you know, the fact that they're not actually referring to Hamas as terrorists is in some way, you could actually say that in some way it's sort of glorifying or supporting terrorism. And that is a prosecutable offence in UK law.
I understand that Sky have had the same position, of course. They've not had the same scrutiny as the BBC on this one in relation to balance. Some would point out, obviously, the most appalling, egregious assault on Jewish people since the Holocaust. The anniversary is tomorrow. Absolute human nightmare and a tragedy. But some would point to the mass casualties in Gaza, which outnumber significantly what happened a year ago. Is that an argument to support the BBC's coverage?
Not at all. And on Sky, you know, Sky receive millions of pounds of funding from Qatar. Qatar Airways sponsor their, you know, weather reports. And
not that I watch, but I've heard, I've been told.
Absolutely. No, that's not an argument, because what the BBC failed to do is explain what is meant by proportionality in international law. Proportionality doesn't mean that if 1,200 people are murdered in Israel, the Israelis can go over and murder 1,200 and rape 1,200 Palestinian women. What it means is that you have a right and a duty in self-defence to remove the threat so this thing can't happen again. The Hamas, Hamas leadership, Hezbollah as well, they deliberately use a ploy of human shields. They've been doing this for decades now, so that they know their children are going to be martyred and killed, and they do this to win the sympathy of Western viewers, and it's a shocker. Michael Crick, you were at the BBC for many years, including on the Newsnight programme. Are the BBC damned if they do and damned if they don't?
Yes, and by the way, it never ceases to amaze me how often you take the opportunity to bash the BBC on your programme, Mark.
Oh, but far from it. God, heaven forbid.
Right, but the Middle East. I mean, I've spent a tiny amount. I was there 3 months during the Israeli siege of '82 of Beirut. It is the most difficult subject to cover of any subject, because it's so complicated. Whatever you report, whatever you say, you get condemned by both sides. There has been brilliant reporting from Jeremy Bowen and Lise Doucette and Orla Guerin. And I ask you, how often has GB News had Palestinian voices on your programmes?
Well, I certainly have, because
as much as you've had pro-Israeli programmes.
On this, I mean, I couldn't do the mathematics of it, but I do try to always make sure that we balance the debate, including the one that we're having right now. Lance, you balked at the mention of Jeremy Bowen's name. Why?
I did, because Jeremy Bowen, he's at the forefront of churning this stuff out. When that you remember early on in this battle, and there was the Al-Aqli hospital was bombed. Yeah. And immediately the BBC came out and they said, the Israelis have bombed this thing, 500 people have died. It turned out...
I think everybody accepts that was a mistake. There are bound to be mistakes.
The BBC... In a war... It was a mistake. Jeremy Bowen admitted that he made a mistake, but he refused to apologise for the mistake. He said, oh, well, don't worry, it's all part of the bigger picture.
But, I mean,
It might have cost Israeli lives.
Is it wrong of the BBC to report from the West Bank at the way in which Israeli settlers go into the West Bank, destroy people's farms, kill them or assault them, and with impunity from the Israeli government? Is it wrong of the BBC to report that?
I don't think it's wrong of the BBC to report that at all. But these incidents are few and far between.
I don't think they are few and far between. The number of settlements in the West Bank that's occurred.
The Israeli government prosecutes these people as well.
Since the Israeli government committed itself to a two-state solution. Yes. That's not going to happen now. Whatever. I mean,
well, Hamas don't want it.
No, but I mean, the international community wants it, and all broadcasters have a duty to be fair and balanced, and I believe that the BBC is fair and balanced now, Michael, when it comes to the whole of the Middle East and to this particularly complicated issue.
I'm glad that you asked me how many pro-Palestine voices we've had on the show, and we've got a regular panellist called Sajila Kershi who always gets into a big debate on this subject. I've always said that taking sides regarding the Middle East is a mug's game. It's a fool's errand. And it's a tragedy on both sides. However,
I mean, by the way, this thing about using the word terrorist, the BBC, like other broadcasters, has decided to avoid using the word terrorist because it's not helpful. So, for instance, if you go back 42 years ago to Shabra and Shatila, when the Israeli soldiers stood by, they were in charge of that part of Beirut, they stood by and encouraged the Christian Phalangist militias to go in and murder 2,000 Palestinians. Was that not an act? That could have been described as an act of terrorism. Look, but broadcasters decide not to use this word because where do you end?
Yes, the BBC. This is it's completely ridiculous argument. The BBC say we don't use the word terrorism, and yet when 9/11 happened, they used the word terrorism. When 7/7 happened, they used the word terrorism. When the Manchester Arena bombing happened, they used the word terrorism. But in this case, with Hamas and with Hezbollah, they refuse to do it because they are siding with the enemy. I'm sorry, but they are, Michael.
Because it makes it difficult. I mean, for instance, we never use the word terrorism when it came to all the reports that broadcasters have done about the security services in this country aiding loyalist murders in Northern Ireland.
Michael,
those are acts of terrorism too. But we didn't use those words because it just leads you down another avenue.
Very briefly, a couple of seconds if you can, Michael. What about the former director of television of the BBC, Danny Cohen, describing the BBC as institutionally anti-Semitic in The Telegraph a couple of months ago?
Well, I just think that's right.
Has he got an axe to grind? He's not on GB News.
What do you mean, institutionally anti-Semitic? In what way? There's a world of difference between being critical of the Israeli government or holding the not being critical of holding the Israeli government to account and being anti-Semitic.
Briefly, last word, Lance.
Well, if you ask the victim of racism whether they think that somebody is being racist towards them, you should trust their judgment. The Jewish community wholeheartedly believes that BBC reporting is anti-Semitic.
I don't think you can speak for the Jewish community. The Jewish community in this country, a lot of members of the Jewish community think that what Israel is doing, and indeed Jewish people in not Israel,
well, let me tell you, clearly we could debate this for much longer, but gentlemen, I'm so grateful for both of your thoughts on this. But next up, a shock development in the race for the Conservative leadership as James Cleverly overtakes Robert Jenrick in a survey of party members. I'll be joined by legendary Brexiteer Tory MP Mark Francois for reaction next.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
National Trust Director General has said something rather curious. She's admitted that 70% of the charity's staff are Union Jack-hating progressive activists. Yes, this was speaking at a Labour Party fringe event. The boss of the charity, Hilary McGrady, acknowledged that there was a gap between her staff's views and the views held by the wider public. So was she being honest? Joining me now to discuss this is historian and broadcaster Rafe Hadel-Mancu, who I believe is with me. Rafe, thank you very much indeed. Can this be true?
The founders of the National Trust and later figures involved in it, like my hero James Lees-Milne, were really motivated by love of nation. But I think that love of nation in the Trust has become actively national self-loathing. And that's really the state of modern Britain. And with the Trust, I mean, what we've done is we've actually entrusted our national heritage to those people who actually actively despise our national heritage. And it's, it's utter madness.
Have these people wanted to take over charities like the National Trust for their political ends, or is it just something that happens? Is it just the type of people who work in charities?
This has been part of the long march through the institutions, that people need to understand that Britain is now a post-revolutionary society. So the buildings that house our institutions look the same, but the people who now run them bear no comparison to the generations who lovingly built and ran them. They are cuckoos in the nest, and we need to understand that. And of course, once you realize that, of course, that explains completely why, the National Trust and others have crudely tried to denigrate our national heroes and link them and their houses to colonialism and slavery, as they ludicrously tried to do.
GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'll be dealing with Gary Lineker in my take at 10. Match of the day. Should he stay? Should he go? But first, in a shock new development in the race for the Tory party leadership, former Foreign Secretary James Cleverly has overtaken Robert Jenrick in a survey of Tory members following a barnstorming speech at party conference. So is Cleverly the one to beat? Is Badenoch out of the picture? And has Jenrick blown it? Let's get the views of Robert Jenrick supporter, legendary Brexiteer, Conservative MP Mark Francois. Mark, very good to see you. Did Robert Jenrick flop at conference?
No, I was in for both James's speech and Robert's. They both gave very good speeches. They both got partial standing ovations. And it was two good performances. And I've seen this poll today. So, look, if you go back a few months, nearly all the polls said Kemi Badenoch was so far ahead that having a contest would almost be a formality. That there were some pundits, not you, Mark, who were writing that. Well, I think everybody would now agree this is a very competitive contest. So if we just believe what those polls said a few months ago, it would all have been over already. It's clearly not. So that's my first point. And we've still got the 2 ballots of MPs to go, and then we move to the party membership. So you cited one poll. I know it's a bit risky to talk about political betting after what happened at the general election, but it is worth citing that the bookies have obviously been running odds on this, and the Telegraph today did an amalgam of all the kind of bookies odds, and on that poll of polls of the bookmakers, if I can call it that, Robert Jenrick was very clearly the favourite. So you've got different polls and different measures putting different candidates ahead. In the votes that have already taken place, in the 2 ballots among members of Parliament, real votes in real ballot boxes, Robert Jenrick was ahead in both. So let's wait and see what happens on Tuesday and Wednesday.
Well, let's bring your friend and former colleague into this conversation, Mark. We've got Sir Michael Fabricant with us, who I think you'll agree, he wins the battle of the outfits tonight, not for the first time. Sir Michael, Robert Jenrick used to be a big David Cameron supporter, very much sort of, on the left of the party. Now he's the Tories' answer to Nigel Farage. Is Robert Jenrick just a cosplay Conservative? Is this an act?
No, I don't think it is. I think he's learned by his mistakes. And, it's a lot better, the strength of those people who are firm with their convictions and actually see the error of their ways than people who just stick to an outmoded idea. But, I look at Robert Jenrick, I think I will be supporting him. Tom Tugendhat, I'm going to be prepared to guess, will get into the final 2 because I think the parliamentary party will want someone on the left, though I think that the general membership of the party will not want someone of the left. James Cleverly, very articulate, but don't forget, in the Foreign Office, he was the one who started the Chagos negotiations to hand them over to Mauritius, and was then told not to go ahead with it by the Prime Minister at the time, which was the right thing for the Prime Minister to do. And James Cleverly, of course, was in charge of the issue with Andy Street, who was the Mayor of the West Midlands and was going to take over the Police and Crime Commissioner role, which they do in London, Manchester and Yorkshire. And the Home Office made a big mess up. I was going to use another word, but I wouldn't use it on GB News. And as a consequence, there was a judicial review and the Home Secretary was found to do it wrong. So I'm not very impressed in that area.
No, indeed. What about Kemi Badenoch, though, Mark Francois? This is a woman that if she was the leader of the Tories, Prime Minister's questions would be a bloodbath every Wednesday, wouldn't it?
Well, before I respond to your question, can I just, for the record, say that in terms of sartorial elegance tonight, Michael has beaten me hands down. So I just want to get that in Hansard, as it were. Look, Kemi is a feisty speaker. We've got 4 good candidates. But yesterday we heard that 973 people crossed the channel. This is the largest number in a single day, I think, for a year or more.
It is. It's a record for the year, yeah.
Right. So one of the reasons I was attracted to vote for Robert, and I didn't dive in with both feet straight away, is that of the 4 candidates, I think it is true to say he has the clearest position on the ECHR.
There you go. It looks like the ECHR could swing it. Mark, I wish we had longer. We'll catch up soon. Next up, Gary Lineker and Match of the Day. Should he stay? Should he go? I'll be giving my verdict in my take at 10.
A nice bright morning will generate a lovely warm day, right through to the evening. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening and welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. As we go ahead into Monday, the rain should be clearing, then sunshine and showers for many of us before turning colder later into the week. So the unsettled conditions are all to do with this area of low pressure out towards the west and these fronts driving cloud and rain. So there could be some early evening sunshine towards the southwest, but otherwise cloud and rain continuing to move its way north and eastwards, affecting much of Scotland to start Monday morning. Clearer skies behind that, turning drier. We'll still see a few showers around, but temperatures generally staying up at around 10 or 11 degrees. So it is going to be a damp and gloomy start across Scotland. We've got outbreaks of rain persisting. This will gradually move its way northward. We've also got a strong easterly wind as well, giving a chilly feel to start the day. Cloudy conditions remaining across Northern Ireland with some showery outbreaks of rain here and pushing into northwestern parts of England. Further towards the south, hopefully waking up to some brighter skies, but also there are going to be some showers around. So that band of rain across Scotland will gradually move its way northwards, affecting much of Orkney and Shetland. Otherwise, it's a case of sunny spells, scattered showers. Some of these could be heavy, containing the odd rumble of thunder, perhaps emerging to give some longer spells of rain at times too. But where you do dodge the showers, we'll see temperatures rising up to 17, possibly 18 degrees towards the south, but unpleasant towards the north. Further spells of heavy rain moving their way northwards across Northern Ireland and into Scotland, and then towards the south through Tuesday, another cluster of showers. Again, could be on the heavy side. Some places may dodge these to see some sunny spells, and that continuing through Wednesday too. But as we go later on in the week, it is going to be turning colder from the north. Bye-bye.
We can expect clear skies, leading to a light and warm day ahead. Lovely. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
And good luck.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date. Or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, it's 10 o'clock. On television, on radio and online, in the United Kingdom and across the world, this is Mark Dolan Tonight. In my take at 10, speculation is growing about Gary Lineker's future on Match of the Day as the BBC enter crisis talks with the star. Should he stay or should he go? I'll be giving my fearless verdict at 10. You won't want to miss it. Plus, should the new Tory leader bring Boris back? And a record 1,000 people crossed the channel illegally yesterday, with 4 dead, including a young child. Will the boat's crisis get worse, not better, under Labour? I'll be asking former Government Minister Anne Widdecombe. Plus, at tonight's top pundits, got political consultant Suzanne Evans, broadcasting legend Michael Crick, and Conservative Party grandee Sir Michael Fabricant. Plus, at tomorrow's newspaper front pages, a packed show, lots to get through. Gary Lineker and Match of the Day. Should he stay or should he go? I'll be giving my verdict straight after the news headlines with someone that must stay, Lewis Mackenzie.
Good evening, it's 10 o'clock. I'm Lewis Mackenzie here in the GB newsroom. Now we start this hour with some breaking news. More massive explosions are happening right now in southern Beirut. These are currently live pictures of where the latest Israeli strikes have just happened. As you can see, smoke and flames are rising in this part of Beirut's southern suburbs. This is the latest escalation amid the ongoing hostilities between Hezbollah and the IDF. We'll, of course, bring you the very latest in this developing story on the eve of the anniversary of the October 7th terror attacks. Well, closer to home, Sir Keir Starmer's facing fresh turmoil as his Chief of Staff, Sue Gray, has resigned. Her exit follows reports of tension in Number 10, including with the Prime Minister's chief advisor, Morgan McSweeney, who's now stepping into her role. Conservative leadership contender Robert Jenrick says her departure exposes vicious Labour infighting and claims that the government is in freefall. In response, Downing Street has announced 5 new senior appointments, with Sir Keir Starmer insisting that the changes will strengthen his team as he approaches 100 days in office. A record-breaking 973 migrants crossed the English Channel in a single day. According to the official figures, they arrived in 17 small boats, surpassing the previous record of 882 set in June of this year. Yesterday's surge also came as 4 migrants, including a young child, sadly died making the journey. The total number of arrivals this year has now reached 26,000. Russia has launched more than 80 drones and 3 missiles at Ukraine in a significant overnight attack. It comes as President Zelensky prepares to unveil a victory plan during a crucial allied meeting in Germany on the 12th of October. This plan is expected to detail steps towards ending the war with Russia. While specifics remain under wraps, US officials suggest it includes a revised request for increased military support and long-range missile systems. As Ukraine nears 1,000 days of conflict with Russia, Boris Johnson says the Russian president is bad but not mad. In a candid interview with GB News' Camilla Tominey, the former Prime Minister shed some light on his interactions with Vladimir Putin, providing a glimpse into their complex relationship.
He means no good for this country. He regards the United Kingdom as among their most important strategic foes, probably their most important strategic foes, which is a pity, but he's chosen that path. And we're now in a very, very unhappy position. And you know, what he is doing in Ukraine is criminal, and it is also a mistake. It's a mistake for Russia, it's a mistake for Putin.
And a new blood test that could detect 12 common cancers is getting a major boost, thanks to a £148 million investment in cutting-edge medical technology. The Health Secretary says the funding will also help advanced AI diagnosis and personalised treatments, with research hubs being set up across UK universities. Wes Streeting, himself a cancer survivor, says the investment could save lives while strengthening Britain's role as a leader in life sciences. Well, those are your latest GB News headlines. I'm Lewis Mackenzie. More from me in an hour's time.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Lewis. Busy hour to come. Will the boats crisis get worse under Labour? And should the new Tory leader bring back Boris? I'll be asking Anne Widdecombe. But first, my take at 10. Let's look at the latest football scores. Gary Lineker 1, BBC 0. In a Daily Mail exclusive, doubts over Gary Lineker's future on Match of the Day grew this weekend after sources close to the presenter declared, "This is not Gary's last show. Gary will decide when he leaves." Will he indeed? If only you and I had such control over our professional destiny. If only we could square up to the boss and tell him or her that we decide when we leave. Now, the paper understands that the corporation's best-paid star is locked in a standoff with bosses over his £1.35 million pay package, amid frenzied speculation that he's on his way out, particularly since the appointment of a brand-new director of sport, who reportedly wants to shake things up and wants a younger audience. Ouch. Perhaps he also doesn't want the channel's flagship sports presenter to be someone who compares Britain's migration policy to 1930s Germany. Perhaps he doesn't want the main sports anchor on the network to refer to October the 7th, the single worst attack on Jewish people since the Holocaust, which sees its anniversary tomorrow, as the Hamas thing. But I've got good news for you, folks. The former England captain and part-time fried potato salesman is reportedly willing to accept a pay cut of £350,000, which would take his salary to a paltry £1 million a year for introducing football clips. How will he possibly cope? An exasperated source close to Lineker said, "Gary just doesn't deserve this." Poor Gary. One second, let me find the world's smallest violin. Things really kicked off on Friday when the Daily Mail saw a draft email from this new head of sport announcing that last night's Match of the Day would be Lineker's final show. Now, the Beeb refused to comment on the email, but notably failed to disown it or deny its existence. But the source close to Lineker said, "He's been a great presenter. People love him." Do they? Well, some do, but others can't stand him. When he was taken off air after his comments about Nazi Germany in relation to the Rwanda plan, ratings increased slightly. Who knew? It's almost like people tune into Match of the Day to watch the football highlights and don't really care who introduces them. Well, the source goes on, "Gary has enjoyed Match of the Day but doesn't expect to be there forever." Well, isn't that nice of him? It's a shame that he won't be there forever. I would have thought we might have stuffed him, but there you go. Now, yesterday, Lineker left his well-appointed London home to film Match of the Day in Salford. Oh dear. That is an awful lot of carbon for this eco-conscious presenter, isn't it? Now, on his way out the door, a Mail on Sunday journalist asked him whether last night would be his final Match of the Day. Lineker rudely dismissed the journalist, saying, "Be better. Be better." God forbid that these public figures, whose salaries are paid for by hard-up Brits, should be held to account. On arrival at Media City Studios in Salford, having pumped a few kilograms of carbon into the atmosphere to get there, Lineker avoided photographers and went in via a side entrance. Unusual for this notorious self-publicist to be so shy. Still, at least he didn't repeat his antics of last week when he told a reporter who asked him about his future on the show to, and I quote, "F off." That's right, Gary Lineker told the journalist to F off. Now, that's not very becoming, is it, of the face of our national state broadcaster and a professional Mr. Nice Guy. But then again, this is a man who preaches about the environment whilst broadcasting from air-conditioned stadia in the Middle East. A man who preaches about human rights and inclusivity whilst working for regimes where being gay is illegal. A man who bemoans our unequal society whilst battling HMRC in court to reduce his tax bill by over £4 million. This is a man who has made a mockery of the BBC's impartiality rules with an opinion on every major political issue that you can think of, and during the Euros, he got in trouble for wearing clothes from Next, a brand that he's paid to endorse. Probably trying to save up his cash before that massive pay cut kicks in. I'll be honest with you, I think it's time to put this ex-footballer on the transfer market. He can go on a free for all I care. It's a red card and an early bath for St Gary. This Match of the Day presenter has had his day. It's time someone blew Gary Lineker's whistle. Your reaction, should Gary Lineker stay on Match of the Day? gbnews.com/your say. But first, tonight's top pundits, political consultant and commentator Suzanne Evans, TV News legend Michael Crick, and Conservative Party grandee Sir Michael Fabricant. Sir Michael, Gary Lineker, should he stay or should he go?
He should go and concentrate on his crisps. That's what I say.
Has he had his chips?
He's had his... I wish he'd just have his fish. But he is the most boring, tedious person, I believe. And I just cannot understand the weakness of the Director-General of the BBC, who constantly puts up with Gary Lineker. You know, I used to work like Michael, but many, many years before Michael, for the BBC. I just find it incredible that he can make the comments that he does and still survive. He's paid to be a sports commentator, not a commentator on public morals, which is what he seems to do. And to compare Israel and the Rwanda policy with Nazi Germany is just distasteful. Why is he still working for the BBC?
Michael, you've worked at the BBC. I mean, can you explain whether Gary Lineker has breached impartiality rules or not? It's complicated, isn't it, because he's a freelancer?
It is complicated. And by the way, this is, what, the second bout of BBC bashing tonight?
Well, I tell you what...
I mean, you're getting a bit desperate.
What we're doing is we're asking questions about the Beeb, and I think we're entitled to.
It's quite right. No, it's quite right. We should hold all institutions to account. But you seem a bit
especially
obsessed
ones
by
we
the
pay
BBC.
for. Especially ones we pay for.
That is an important consideration too. And actually, on this issue, I do think that Gary Lineker has got to stop. I mean, I think he's a superb presenter of Match of the Day, and I enjoy watching him. I think it's over the top to pay him, what is it, 1.3 million or whatever?
1.35.
Well, yeah. And I do think he has to shut up on the political front.
Hallelujah.
And if he can't, then I'm afraid it should be the end of the road,
well,
because I think that's really, really important.
It's interesting that you say that, because if you actually, listen again to my take at 10, I'm not criticising the BBC regarding this story, because I think that Gary Lineker has brought the BBC into disrepute, and I think he's destroyed their reputation for impartiality with his comments on Twitter and X and all the rest of it.
I
think he's harmed.
We sort of agree there. We sort of agree there. I think there are certain people in the BBC who are so big, even though they're not covering news and current affairs, they're so big that even if they're doing cookery programmes or sports programmes, they've got to be. They cannot be. I mean, if you're a sports presenter on Radio Lincolnshire, it doesn't really matter if you express a few political views. But if you are such a big figure and one of the highly paid people in the corporation, I think it can't carry on like I mean, he seems to have been a bit quieter recently, but I think it's got to be sorted out between him and Tim Davie.
Suzanne, should he stay? Should he go?
Yeah, I think he should probably go. I mean, it's whether he's freelance or not. We've all worked for the BBC, sat on this sofa. I worked for the BBC, always as a freelance. Being freelance didn't absolve me from having to follow the corporation's guidelines. I'm not a great fan of... I don't watch Match of the Day. I'm not a football person. What I have seen, I agree, he's a very good presenter, but he called me stupid once. So,
Online or to your face?
Online. Online, not to my face.
Can you remember the altercation?
But I can, but he just called me stupid. It made all the press, and so, Lineker calls UKIP's Evans stupid. And that was that. So I'm not really going to stand up for him.
What did that encounter tell you about his character?
Well, I suppose I think what it said was he's the kind of person that just shoots his mouth off without thinking, really. And lots of people do this. And I keep saying, why, if you've got a reputation in one field, why are you going to risk that reputation by getting involved in politics and making political statements? And I think it's the same with businesses. You get some businesses who come out with some political statement, and then people either say, oh, aren't they great or aren't they awful? And you potentially then got a boycott situation on your hands. Now, Lineker's obviously still got his job at the moment, but my advice to anybody would be, look, if you're doing a specific job and you have a reputation for a specific issue, for goodness sake, stick to that. Don't risk your career by moving outside and getting involved in politics.
Fascinating.
He should stand for
Michael.
I was just thinking he should stand. He should stand for Parliament.
He should, actually.
That's what he should do.
There is a good... I mean, Mark Chapman is a very good presenter of Match of the Day too, and in fact, a superb analyst of lots of sports. So he is an obvious replacement. Yeah, stand for Parliament, or maybe even ask Keir Starmer for a peerage, because Starmer's going to be doling out loads of peerages in the next few weeks.
That was impressive, isn't there? We had Sebastian Coe in Parliament, you know, people in sport, Tanny Gray-Thompson in the Lords. There's lots of other people.
Lord Lineker, what do you think? Do you like the sound of that?
Lord Lineker of Crisp.
Oh, my God. That's it.
Lord
Lineker of Leicester. OK, well, look, folks, what do you think? Do you think that Gary Lineker should remain in post as the presenter of Match of the Day for a knockdown price of £1 million a year? gbnews.com/your say. But next up, should the new Tory leader bring back Boris? And will the boats crisis get worse under Labour? I'll be asking Anne Widdecombe next.
I'm Michael Portillo. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Please tell me that we're British. In our darkest hour, we can work around this. The beer will still be flowing at Christmas. Tell me, please.
Martin, without using bad language, there's no words to describe that this is another major blow to the hospitality sector. I wake up every day with anxiety thinking, what's going to happen to us now? Oh, my God, now the weather's against us. Not only are the government absolutely battering us, then the weather's now hitting us as well.
Kate Stewart, this can only mean one thing. Prices, once again, going through the roof.
And there's nothing we can do. We have on costs. We have to buy from the brewery. We have the VAT. We have then the VAT, what we take. It is an absolute nightmare. To be in the pub game now, Martin, is very, very difficult. And there's no light at the end of the tunnel. Everything just keeps hammering us from every different direction. And obviously, we have to pass that on to the customers, then price increases. There's nothing we can do. We don't want to sell beer at an inflated price. We want it as cheap as possible to get people through them doors. But we have no option. They're going to go up again in the new budget. You know, there's no help for us. What are we supposed to do, Martin, except the only option is to close the doors and say, enough is enough. We can't do this anymore. I absolutely cry my eyes out having to put the prices up, because you think, oh, my God, people are just going to turn away and walk. But we can't swallow the costs all the time, Martin. It's impossible for us to do, because we will go bankrupt. There has to be, there's inflation getting hammered on us yet again, and we have to pass it on. I feel it when I take my children out for something to eat. You're like, wow, that has just cost a fortune. But what is the answer? The answer is the government needs to look at saving the hospitality sector and stop being so greedy in everything that they take away from us, or there won't be pubs.
GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Stephen Dixon, and thanks for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Should Should Gary Lineker stay as the host of Match of the Day? Big reaction to my take at 10. Alan says, Mark, I can't stand him. I always mute him. Well, I hope you never mute this programme. David says, Lineker is like 99% of all footballers. Pond life. Shutty says, Gary has gone quiet since his beloved Labour got in. Very similar to Carol Vorderman. And Alan, a different Alan, says, the BBC are a joke and some of their so-called stars are being found out. Keep your messages coming. But it's time now for the newsmaker. And as he promotes his memoirs, Boris Johnson reminds us what a compelling personality he is. Entertaining, fearless, unpredictable. The politician, the country and his own party can't stop talking about. So should the next leader of the Conservatives bring Boris back? Perhaps as chairman or in another frontline role for the party? Well, our very own Camilla Tominey asked him exactly that in an exclusive interview with the former Prime Minister earlier today. Take a listen.
Do you want to return to the political fray in the vein
as I used
of
to say, as I used to say, and I repeat, I think the chances of my mounting a comeback, getting back into number 10, are about as good as my chances of being reincarnated as an olive, or decapitated by a frisbee, or being locked in a disused fridge, or blinded by a champagne cork.
You literally used those phrases to describe the unlikelihood of you becoming Prime Minister, and you became Prime Minister. So you could stage a comeback.
I think it remains of that order of probability.
Well, let's get the views of someone who knows the Conservative Party intimately well, former Government Minister and now Reform UK spokesperson Anne Widdecombe. Anne, you are no Conservative supporter these days, but did they make a mistake ditching Boris in the first place?
Oh, I think when they started on that long series of defenestrations, they sealed their own fate, and of course they were wrong. All they did was encourage the press and the media to go for the next one and then the next one. And actually, if you want to succeed as a party, you have to stand up for the leader and unite behind the leader. So, yes, I think they got that wrong. But should the next leader of the opposition bring him back? Well, not if he's got any sense of self-preservation, because the instant that you have Boris back in any major role, all the speculation will be about when's he going to make a bid for number 10. So I don't really think that would be a wise move.
And what have you made of Boris Johnson's insistence that he was stitched up whilst in number 10, leading to his departure? Is Boris Johnson a man more sinned against than sinning?
Oh, I mean, I've thought for a very long time that he was indeed. There were several factors. One was he had a lot of enemies, yes. That is true. But the other factor was that he did not take sufficient account of that. He dispensed with Dominic Cummings, but then didn't have another advisor as a sounding board. I don't really count Carrie. And so that meant that when, there was a lot of trouble, there was nobody to say, shut up, Boris. Don't speak, Boris, until we've actually established the facts. Don't go off and say things that you're then going to have to qualify and then dash it, re-qualify. Shut up, man. Nobody said that to him. Nobody said it to him. So every time he opened his mouth, he made things worse.
And I know you'll be looking forward to Nigel Farage's memoirs. After all, he is the leader of the party that you now support. But will you be reading Boris's book?
Oh, well, I've already read the excerpts in the newspapers. And I've enjoyed those tremendously. It's everything I thought, and he doesn't care what he says. And he's got a tremendous sense of humour. So I never read any extracts yet without laughing and thinking, yes, So I think this will be a runaway bestseller. Be very surprised if it's not.
Well, I'm sure that quote will go on the paperback edition from you, Anne, if his publishers are worth their salt. Now, Anne, let's get to a more serious topic. Tragedy in the Channel yesterday as 4 die, with reports of a child trampled to death. And a record 1,000 people making the crossing in a single day. That's the highest this year. Notwithstanding that this is an economic, national security and humanitarian disaster, politically, Labour just can't let these numbers continue, can they?
Well, they look as if they're going to. They've got no policy, as I've said on this programme many, many times. They have no policy. Their policy was ditch Rwanda, so yes, so we knew they were going to ditch a deterrent, but they didn't put any deterrent in its place. They don't have any policy other than somehow they're going to smash the smuggling gangs. which is about as nebulous as you can get, because we all know that if you take one gang out, another one comes along. It's very lucrative trade. What you need is a deterrent. They haven't got that. There's a complete policy vacuum there, a real vacuum there, with no policies at all, either to deter or to speed things up or to cope with the situation. Just none at all. And while there is no deterrent, the boats will continue to come. And while the boats continue to come, there will occasionally be awful tragedies. And they will, yes, involve women and children.
Indeed. Now, and of course, Labour will argue they've inherited this mess from the Conservatives and they're going to resource this new border command, who are going to be robust and they're going to try to smash the gangs. Obviously, we hope they succeed. You have your doubts. Notwithstanding the politics of this, the bottom line is that the humanitarian case for stopping the boats couldn't be stronger with this child trampled to death this weekend. At what point are people going to show some empathy and understand that unless we stop the boats, the suffering will continue?
Well, I don't know when Labour will wake up to that. I mean, the Tories had a very weak deterrent in Rwanda because they couldn't get it off the ground. But it was at least a deterrent. They did at least understand the very simple principle that the only way you're going to stop the boats coming is if there is something here that they don't want to have to deal with. Such as, for example, universal detention, instead of putting them into hotels and letting them be free to come and go. Unless you actually have something like that, you won't stop the boats. And as I've said already, if you don't stop the boats, you won't stop the tragedies.
And brilliant stuff. Listen, I wish we had longer. We'll catch up in a week's time. My thanks to former government minister and now Reform UK supporter Anne Widdecombe. Always the highlight of Mark Dolan tonight on a Sunday evening. Speaking of highlights, we've got tomorrow's papers. I think you'll agree my panel are coming in hot tonight. We've got some cracking front pages, some big headlines. See you in 2.
Good evening and welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. As we go ahead into Monday, the rain should be clearing, then sunshine and showers for many of us before turning colder later into the week. So the unsettled conditions are all to do with this area of low pressure out towards the west and these fronts driving cloud and rain. So there could be some early evening sunshine towards the southwest, but otherwise cloud and rain continuing to move its way north and eastwards, affecting much of Scotland to start Monday morning. Clearer skies behind that, turning drier. We'll still see a few showers around, but temperatures generally staying up at around 10 or 11 degrees. So it is going to be a damp and gloomy start across Scotland. We've got outbreaks of rain persisting. This will gradually move its way northward. We've also got a strong easterly wind as well, giving a chilly feel to start the day. Cloudy conditions remaining across Northern Ireland with some showery outbreaks of rain here and pushing into northwestern parts of England. Further towards the south, hopefully waking up to some brighter skies, but also there are going to be some showers around. So that band of rain across Scotland will gradually move its way northwards, affecting much of Orkney and Shetland. Otherwise, it's a case of sunny spells, scattered showers. Some of these could be heavy, containing the odd rumble of thunder, perhaps emerging to give some longer spells of rain at times too. But where you do dodge the showers, we'll see temperatures rising up to 17, possibly 18 degrees towards the south, but unpleasant towards the north. Further spells of heavy rain moving their way northwards across Northern Ireland and into Scotland, and then towards the south through Tuesday, another cluster of showers. Again, could be on the heavy side. Some places may dodge these to see some sunny spells, and that continuing through Wednesday too. But as we go later on in the week, it is going to be turning colder from the north. Bye-bye.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
down to earth,
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
and most importantly, honest,
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference.
It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Really want to do the beat.
OK, we're going to have a look at Sir Michael Fabricant's beaver in just a moment, but first, tomorrow's front pages. Such a badly behaved panel, let me tell you.
We were on.
You thought Michael Crick was bad. Fabricant's like, hold my beer. OK. Metro, PM's reshuffle as Chief of Staff quits. A bad grey at the office, Keir. Keir Starmer has been forced to reshuffle his team of advisers after controversial Chief of Staff Sue Gray quit following a power struggle inside Number 10. Also, October the 7th, 1 year on from the Hamas attack on Israel. Independent, 365 days of horror since October the 7th. And they go through the grim statistics about casualties, injuries in that conflict, which sadly shows no sign of ending. Daily Express now. It's breaking my heart. Mother of last British Gaza hostage, Emily, pleads for her release. And Starmer Chief Sue Gray exits his, quote, sinking ship. Also, Meghan sparkles, but where was Harry? The I newspaper, Gray ousted in Downing Street power struggle. Election strategist McSweeney replaces Gray as top aide in Number 10 as PM moves to quell accusations that his government is stalling. Cabinet Minister denies the move is a win for the boys, telling the I there was no misogyny. Starmer praises Gray for playing a vital role. Daily Telegraph, Sue Gray ousted as PM wields the knife. Advisor behind election success to take over after infighting and leaks at the heart of Number 10. Stand behind us, Netanyahu warns the West. And on October the 7th, Britain has forgotten one of its own. The mother of the only British hostage still captive in Gaza said her daughter has been forgotten as she calls on the government to push for her release. Her daughter is called Emily Damari. More illegal migrants in UK than anywhere in Europe. Britain has more illegal migrants than any other European nation, a major study has found. There are up to 745,000 illegal migrants in the UK, accounting for 1 in 100 of the population, according to the research led by Oxford University experts. This is more than double the 300,000 in France and ahead of the upper estimate of 700,000 in Germany. Daily Mirror, October the 7th anniversary. It's been a year of hell. Time to find peace. Daily Mail, Amanda Abingdon's cancer scare and what Giovanni really said the day she left Strictly. And chaos in Number 10 after weeks of infighting. Starmer's top aide is ousted within first 100 days. And a new look as Meghan Markle goes solo. Daily Star, boring United. Michael Crick won't be happy. I think it was a 1-1 draw against Brighton.
0-0. 0-0. Aston Villa, I was there.
Aston Villa.
Yeah.
Oh, God, I'm glad I'm not presenting match of the day. Turns out Gary Lineker's worth all that money. And we'll talk about that game. Also, now crazy boffins want to bring back to life extinct 5-foot rodents with 9-inch teeth. Did you see that massive beaver? Giant beavers could be on the rampage in a river near you after boffins vow to bring the fantastic beasts back from extinction. Those are your front pages. For full reaction, tonight's top pundits. We have political consultant and commentator Suzanne Evans, TV News legend Michael Crick, and Beaver fan and Conservative Party grandee Sir Michael Fabricant. We'll get to the rodents shortly, but let's talk about the cheeky little creatures at Number 10. Fighting like rats in a sack, Michael Crick. A bad grey at the office, Sir Keir. Who do we blame for this debacle?
Well, ultimately, responsibility lies with the Prime Minister for not thinking through how he was going to run Downing Street. I'm not sure the solution that has been produced out of this, that Morgan McSweeney is now the Chief of Staff, I'm not sure that's the answer. Morgan McSweeney may be a brilliant campaigner and won the extraordinary election result, but what you need is somebody who knows how government works and the inner workings of Whitehall. Sue Gray had that. The trouble is that Sue Gray didn't have the political instincts as to, what would go, how the public would react, how Labour MPs, how Labour members would react. Now, you need somebody who combines all of that. It's rare to find people like that.
And McSweeney is a journalist as well. Not that there's anything wrong with being a journalist.
Well, we all
but
are
that's not the it's not the political skill necessarily that's best for being chief of staff.
Well, he'll get the messaging right, won't he?
He
and
may
there'll
get
probably be few of these gaffes and PR own goals.
It depends on whether, of course, the policies are determined by Keir Starmer or by McSweeney. Because at the end of the day, it's Starmer and his cronies, Rachel Reeves and whoever, and Lammy, who are actually making the policies. And as Suzanne said, these are all politics of envy without any practical thought as to what was going to actually happen by doing them.
They just seem to be tone deaf. So they come up with something. You know, it's an old thing in politics. You float an idea, you see how the public respond, you then decide, well, are we going to continue to run with this or are we going to row back from it? They don't seem to have any of that sensitivity at all. So despite the fact that Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer have been talking about this painful decisions that need to be made in the budget, which is terrifying everybody. So the housing market's grinding to a halt. You know, people are taking money out of their ISAs, they're cashing in their pensions.
Investments
all
down.
These problems, investments down, stock market, mind you, it's been all over the place since COVID. So all this stuff, and they're still carrying on saying the same thing, when actually what the country needs now is a little bit of confidence, a little bit of certainty. They shouldn't keep frightening us, but they don't seem to care.
But won't that political
now
nous come from McSweeney, this new figure, who's the great Svengali of elections?
Well, supposedly, but as I said earlier, you know, he could be the best Svengali of elections in the world, but ultimately he didn't win the election. The Tories lost it, I'm afraid,
That's
Michael.
right. No, that's absolutely right. Only 21% of those people
actually voted for them.
Who actually could vote voted for Labour. What it was a massive vote against the Tories. It was no vote for the Labour Party. That's why they could get away with just saying change, 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 and not actually talking about any policy.
There hasn't actually been much change in lots of areas either. You may think there has, but I don't.
Michael, you'll be glad to see the back of this Tory government. I'm sure you were glad to see the back of them in July. But do you think that there's any hope that Keir Starmer will get the hang of politics? Because I've not seen any evidence so far.
No, I don't think he's a natural politician. And, you know, there are certain people who are political... Brown and Blair, whatever their differences, were both, you know, they were instinctive about what the public would take.
Blair is a political genius.
Cameron was as well, and Starmer isn't. And Starmer's background is as a public servant, and then before that as a barrister. He's not the right. He hasn't got those skills.
Yeah, I think Labour have got a dud actually.
I tell you the other thing. I think Starmer is aware of that. Is at least aware of this, that his frontbench team is pretty weak.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the reasons why he made 6 of the new MPs into ministers straight away, totally unprecedented in post-war politics, is because he wants to get them into the cabinet quick. People like Georgia Gould, who was his, the leader of Camden Council, daughter of Philip Gould, one of Blair's big advisors.
Yeah.
And he's going to... And so I think there will be a lot of pruning of the cabinet a year or two down the road once these new ministers have sort of learnt the ropes.
But it'd be interesting to see how long Keir Starmer lasts. How do we think he's going to stay as leader of the Labour Party or not? Because I've spoken to various people in the Labour Party and they think he's going to be out pretty soon.
Yes, I mean, is the Labour Party more loyal to its leaders historically than the Tories?
Yeah, I mean, it tends not to get rid of leaders in office and not much in opposition, actually, whereas the Conservatives are slightest...
Well, they did for Tony Blair when he was still popular, despite the Iraqi war. And the point is, and I've made this point before, is parties are unstable when a large percentage of them are new intake. I think over half of all Labour MPs only got in a few months. They'll be panicking.
And not only that.
They'll be panicking in a year or two if the Labour Party and Starmer are not more popular. And at the moment, I see no signs of him becoming popular because, as I said, he's a dud. He doesn't actually, I think all three of us agree, he doesn't actually understand what people want.
And got no charisma whatsoever.
No.
And also,
when can we discuss
400...
beavers?
We'll get to your...
When you have 410 MPs, the number that can be ministers is very few. So all the rest, many of the rest are frustrated. And actually, there are a lot of new... I think, overall, the new MPs are more able than the ones who were there before.
Oh, thank you.
Which is... no, I don't mean the ones who lost their seats. I mean the ones who survived. Wes Streeting, I think, is the most formidable person in the cabinet.
I agree.
He's the one that
very able.
You know, he was expecting to be the first, the Labour Prime Minister next, and of course Starmer got there first.
But he's more right wing than I am, is Wes Streeting.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. Yes.
Yes, I mean, he's fearless, isn't he? He's quite happy to, for example, ask the NHS to look at its culture and to improve and not spend more money on it. Bit of tough love for the NHS. But of course, if they were to go for another leader, it would be a woman next time, wouldn't it?
Oh, well, of course, this thing about Labour Party, you know, they've never had a woman leader, whereas, of course, the Conservatives have not only had women leaders, they've had three prime ministers, female prime ministers. And Labour must be... This is, of course, if Kemi were to become the next Conservative leader, not only would she be a woman, she'd be a black woman as well, and that would absolutely incense
I don't think that's going to happen.
I don't think
well,
it's
let's talk about that next, because I've got to ask you at home, who do you think is the Tory leadership candidate that Labour would fear most? Which of those candidates could win an election in 4 years' time? Plus, a cancer update in regards to King Charles. So, big royal news, plus the Tory leadership and more front pages. Don't go anywhere.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
You could, if you're getting a bit bored later on and you've got some free time, tune in to Friends. Do you remember that?
It's on somewhere in the world all the time.
Probably one of those
incredible.
Obscure TV channels.
It's a big anniversary today, because apparently today was 30 years ago, was when it first hit the screens.
In 1994. Just before, or just after I was born, 89 me. The show ran for 10 series, becoming one of the most popular sitcoms of all time, and it scored numerous accolades, including 62 Primetime Emmy nominations. Joining us now in the studio to talk everything Friends and the big anniversary is showbiz reporter Steph Tetchy and my friend as well.
Happy Friends-anniversary, guys. Yes, today is quite a monumental day for one of the most incredible sitcoms to ever hit our TV screens.
That it's on somewhere in the world.
There's millions of people around the world who are watching reruns, watching either streaming of Friends, and it doesn't get boring for people. I think, you know, 30 years later, just that it's such a simple concept. 6 New Yorkers just following their lives and their friendships. It proved a hit with loads of viewers worldwide.
The casting was super.
It was so incredible, and the thing is, these were all fresh faces at the time. It wasn't like they picked like people who were at the top of the game then. And I think it was such a hit with viewers is because they became our friends as well over the years. But obviously today is played with a bit of poignancy because, you know, there is one friend that is missing. And the creators of the show, Martha Kaufman and David Crane, saying that today is a bit fraught for both the cast because of Matthew Perry's passing, and he was known as one of the funniest friends, as most people would describe him as, and so today is kind of marred with sadness.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news,
Will, please bring us up to date.
or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons,
Very, very curious.
we bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now, more front pages. Let's take a look at the Times. And Spurs collapse. Tottenham throw away 2-goal lead. Also, Rachel Reeves abandons pensions tax raid to spare teachers and nurses. Labour is expected to abandon plans to mount a tax raid on pensions savings amid warnings that it would unfairly penalise up to 1 million teachers, nurses and other public sector workers. Israel marks 12 months of loss and war, and Grey ousted in Labour coup. And we've got some more news for you. The Daily Mail is this evening reporting that the King Charles, will pause his cancer treatment in order to fly to Australia for a royal visit. The 75-year-old monarch will arrive down under on October the 18th, and the Mail's royal reporter, Rebecca English, understands that doctors are happy for him to temporarily stop treatment for 11 days. Suzanne Evans, a reminder that our King is battling this disease.
Yes, a reminder that both the King and of course, the Princess of Wales are battling this horrible disease that I battled myself. I was very lucky. I was diagnosed very early and, touch wood, made a full recovery.
There's no wood in the studio, let me tell you.
Well, dear, I'm in trouble.
Can you tell we're a startup?
But yeah, you know, all credit to both of them. They've carried on going. It's very difficult to do that. Cancer treatment is so much better these days. It's so much better, and I can only wish both of them all the very best.
And it's a measure of the man, Michael, that our King, our monarch, will rather focus on his duties travelling to Australia than receive cancer treatment. His commitment to the job is supreme.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think King Charles is very different from the late Queen, but you know, I've met him on a few occasions. He's absolutely dedicated to the job. And when people made fun of him years ago, talking about ecology and green issues, they've all come to the fore now. So he's actually been ahead of his time. And, you know, frankly, long may he reign.
Michael, I don't know whether you're a monarchist or not, but he hasn't really put a foot wrong in the top job, has he?
No, he hasn't, actually. And I thought he might do, because he does have strong opinions on, well, as Michael says, green issues. You wouldn't agree with him on a lot of that. But I thought that there would be a danger that when he became king, he would, unlike his mother, you know, make it clear where his views are. I think there was an occasion where he did make... I can't remember what it was now, quite early on. But and I think the fact he's gone to Australia for 11 days is actually quite a good sign, really, isn't it?
Yes, true. If he was very poorly, that wouldn't be happening, would it?
Yeah.
But you're right. I thought he was going to be a terrible king. I thought he'd be a bit like Gary Lineker, you know, sounding off when he shouldn't have been. But I've been very pleasantly surprised. I felt the same as you, Michael. I thought it might be a totally different regime from that of Queen Elizabeth. But actually, no, he's slid into the job very well.
Do you remember the Spider Letters row
yes,
about 10 years ago? And he was always writing to Labour ministers saying, what are you doing about this and what are you doing about that? And some of these issues were quite political.
Yeah.
In fact, I doorstepped him about that. And,
really? You doorstepped him?
And his press secretary assaulted me. It's all on YouTube.
I remember you door-stopping me once.
How do you doorstop the Prince of Wales? How did you get that close to him?
Well, because he was coming to... it was extraordinary. He was coming to Marks and Spencer's in Oxford Street, and I thought I'd never get anywhere near. And you know,
was this an official visit, or was he just buying his underpants?
And, there was hardly any... he was Prince of Wales, of course, at the time, but he wasn't going to get his... Well, he might have got some while he was there. Anyway, there I went up to him and said, you know, about these Spider Letters, should you be writing them? And then his press secretary came and sort of elbowed me out of the way and lifted the top of my microphone and threw it on the floor in disgust.
Oh, that's bad.
And, as I say, it's all on YouTube. You can imagine my bosses at ITN... we're having kittens. Oh, do we run this or not?
And I hope they did.
And I tell you what I did. I mentioned it all on Twitter, so they had to run it then.
Good for you. Canny, as always. Can we talk about the race for the Tory leadership? It's heated up a bit, hasn't it, Michael? It's got interesting.
It has. It's very interesting because, as you said earlier on, first of all, you had, I think, Kemi Badenoch was way out in front. But actually, how do we make these judgments? Because although it seems now that James Cleverly is ahead, that's according to Con Home. And Con Home determines that by the number of people who actually contact them, you know, on the email listing. But, you know, I don't know. I'm not accusing, but could it be the Russians and fake names?
Oh, my goodness.
Maybe we don't know. Maybe they deliberately put James Cleverly ahead because they think he'll be an easy touch in dealing with Russia and Putin.
Well,
we don't know.
That's the case.
We don't know.
Ultimately, it's up to the MPs, isn't it? Who the final two are.
No, to the final two.
Yeah,
and then, of course, it will be the members.
I think on Tuesday it goes down to 3 and then Wednesday down to 2. Who do you think will be the last 2 on the ticket?
Well, my theory is that one of the final two will be Tom Tugendhat. And the reason why I believe this, and I don't think he'll win, but I think the reason for this is that there is a grouping in the Conservative Parliamentary Party called One Nation, which is, I wouldn't say to the left, but slightly more to the left than others, shall we say. And I think they will want a representative to be in the final two. However, the general membership of the party is not of that ilk. They're more to the right. So I don't think Tom Tugendhat will become the leader. So it all depends now on who that other person will be. Will it be Kemi, will it be Cleverly, or will it be Rob Jenrick?
But on the other hand, the members voted for Cameron, didn't they, rather than Davis in 2025?
But Davis did very badly, though.
He threw it away with a bad speech, didn't he?
He did a very bad speech, but also David Davis hadn't made it clear what his political views were. In any event, nobody really knew. And he'd been a government whip. I remember being shoved around by David. No, I wasn't shoved around, but I remember being bullied anyway. I rather enjoyed it.
Were you manhandled?
I've always liked being manhandled by
Michael, was this before Me Too?
They stopped doing it with me because they knew I was enjoying it.
By the way, can I quickly ask you, do you think that Jenrick will edge it with merchandise? Because there have been some goodies at conference which...
yes, absolutely. He had... I back a Bobby J.
I want a Bobby J, isn't it?
I want Bobby J, but he also had this marvellous thing, which is...
That, I have to say.
Now, you've got to guess what it is. I had to pick one up. It's a marvellous... Several people thought it was a shovel, but it isn't a shovel.
I know what it is. Yeah. And I have to say, that model is particularly useless.
Yeah, I first saw one of those at your UKIP conference.
Did you really?
About 10 years ago.
So that is something for when you're delivering leaflets in election time. It's a thing.
You shove it through the door.
Through your letterbox.
You shove it through a letterbox. You don't get your fingers bitten by... Because this is the thing. You always get a huge dog hurling himself at the door and taking your fingers off. Or you end up scratching, because now... But letterboxes... I'm a great believer, by the way. I've got to say this. I am a great supporter, ever since putting leaflets in through people's doors, of the Post Office Union, because the Post Office Workers Union, because putting letters in through there, and then the worst thing are those ruddy letterboxes at the bottom.
Oh, they're the worst.
This thing you slide...
But it's useless because it's too big.
I'm going to get my Did You Back... Sorry, this is Did You See the Massive Beaver? Which is a good political slogan, by the way.
Well, that would do it.
And what you do is you do it and you shove it through the door. Oh, the camera's not on. You're trying to demonstrate it here, and it pops out.
You know the other purpose of this?
Fabulous.
It stops your opponents going around and taking leaflets out of letterboxes, which has been known to happen.
I'm glad you clarified what the purpose of that device is.
You don't need that. You just need a wooden spoon, actually.
Well, a wooden spoon. I always forget them.
That's too big for small letterboxes.
Well, actually, all of you. But, Michael, it's a weak field, isn't it, this Tory leadership?
It is. There isn't a sort of... somebody you think, yes, they'll transform the party. There isn't a sort of Michael Heseltine figure or a Boris Johnson figure. It's, I think, basically, my views are Kemi Badenoch is too much of a loose cannon and would be very damaging to the party. I think Robert Jenrick, my suspicions with him is that he'd end up doing a Starmer, that he'd move back to the centre as soon as he got elected. I think that James Cleverly is probably, as he said himself, the most normal of the candidates in terms of, looking like an ordinary bloke.
I don't go for normal.
And Tom Tugendhat, I think, looks more prime ministerial.
Problem with Tugendhat or Cleverly is it's more of the same, isn't it?
It is, I'm afraid. And I think if you get Tugendhat and Cleverly on that final ballot, the members are not going to be happy because they are not the more conservative, traditional conservative candidate that I think the Conservative membership is looking for. We've had enough of One Nation. They've screwed it up. They lost the last election. You need somebody now who's further right.
There you go. Well, I think you'd agree with that, Michael.
And somebody who's stronger in opposition.
Briefly, would you like to see wild rodents? What are they called? Beavers. Would you like a return to beaver?
Yeah, I'd love to see giant...
You like beaver?
I'm heavily into beavers. Is that right? But I would also, if I had my way, and that's why I'm not standing for the leadership of the party, I'd bring back bears.
And on that note, he's always cuddly. Thank you, my brilliant pundits. You at home for listening, watching or hearing on the radio, and I'll see you next time. Headliners is next.
A nice bright morning will generate a lovely warm day, right through to the evening. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening and welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. As we go ahead into Monday, the rain should be clearing, then sunshine and showers for many of us before turning colder later into the week. So the unsettled conditions are all to do with this area of low pressure out towards the west and these fronts driving cloud and rain. So there could be some early evening sunshine towards the southwest, but otherwise cloud and rain continuing to move its way north and eastwards, affecting much of Scotland to start Monday morning. Clearer skies behind that, turning drier. We'll still see a few showers around, but temperatures generally staying up at around 10 or 11 degrees. So it is going to be a damp and gloomy start across Scotland. We've got outbreaks of rain persisting. This will gradually move its way northward. We've also got a strong easterly wind as well, giving a chilly feel to start the day. Cloudy conditions remaining across Northern Ireland with some showery outbreaks of rain here and pushing into northwestern parts of England. Further towards the south, hopefully waking up to some brighter skies, but also there are going to be some showers around. So that band of rain across Scotland will gradually move its way northwards, affecting much of Orkney and Shetland. Otherwise,